Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final webinar in our 2021 Summer Science Seminar Series, brought to you by the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. My name is Carrie Furness, and I'm the Program Manager here at the Southeast CASC. So in this virtual seminar, we're highlighting projects, Southeast CASC funded projects that support resource management actions across the Southeast. Sorry, I'm trying to let people into the waiting room at the same time. So here's what to expect from today's webinar. Ashlyn will go over some meeting logistics, including getting some feedback via a short poll. And then we'll introduce our speaker for the day. He'll present for 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end before we wrap up. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to Ashlyn Shore, our communication specialist here at the Southeast CASC, who'll give us a quick intro to our Zoom interface.
Thanks, Carrie, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Carrie mentioned, I'm just quickly going to go over a few features of the Zoom interface that we'll be using for the webinar today, though I'm sure that most of you are pretty familiar with Zoom at this point. So you can see that on the bottom left of your Zoom screen, these controls will allow you to mute and unmute your audio. So we'll keep all of our lines muted and just ask that you keep your video off so we can lessen distractions throughout the presentation. In the middle of the bottom bar, that's where you can access the chat window, and I'd encourage you, if any questions come up during Greg's presentation, just go ahead and submit those in the chat and we can discuss those after the talk. So we'll be monitoring questions there, and we'll pose them to our speaker during the Q&A session right after his presentation. Just to let you know, we'll be recording today's webinar, and you can access and share out that recording afterwards from our website, on our Science Series webpage, and on our YouTube channel. So quickly, we'd just like to launch a short poll just to get a little bit of information about who's with us today, and kind of to help us know how to continue to get this information out about these seminars. So if you don't mind just taking about 30 seconds, this is really helpful for us to know how we should promote and just to get an idea of who's with us today. So we've got quite a bit of federal folks on the line. And it looks like the newsletter is a really nice way to hear about these things. A lot of colleagues sharing. I'm glad to hear that. Still with the federal folks leading the pack. So yeah, we've got 75%. And thanks, Carrie, for ending that poll. I'm just going to take a quick screenshot to hold that information. So yeah, thank you everybody for filling that out. It's great to see the breadth of folks in the audience today. So yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Carrie.
Great, thanks, Ashlyn. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, who is Dr. Greg Steyer. He is the Gulf of Mexico Science Advisor for the U.S. Geological Survey Southeast region. So Greg coordinates USGS science in the Gulf of Mexico region on behalf of the Bureau, and serves as a USGS liaison and technical resource for agencies working on Gulf Coast ecosystem restoration. His research focuses on developing comprehensive monitoring programs, adaptive management approaches, and ecological and landscape models for use in Gulf restoration decision support. So he'll be discussing today a great research project that Southeast CASC funded several years ago, and that involved partners from multiple agencies and organizations that you'll hear a bit more about here. So the title of his talk today is Structured Decision-Making as a Tool for Coastal Restoration, a case study on Ship Island, Mississippi. So now I'll turn it over to you, Greg, and please give a nod to advance the slides as we go along.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Carrie and the Southeast CASC for inviting me to speak with you today. Today's talk is going to represent work, as Carrie said, from the CASC from 2013 through 2015 regarding using structured decision-making to inform restoration construction decisions on Ship Island, Barrier Island, Mississippi. The reason this older work is being presented now is because the Barrier Island Restoration Project was actually recently completed. It was constructed between December 2017 and December 2020. And it sort of provides the opportunity to see how the structured decision-making process was actually used in construction and in adaptive management decision-making. Next slide, please. And so I'd like to recognize my co-authors and collaborators that engaged in the decision model development over the 2-year period. And you see them listed. And I'd also especially like to thank Supi Daliander and Justin McDonald and Elise Irwin for providing me some of their slides for this presentation today. Also, if you're interested, additional details of the Ship Island project can be found in Daliander et al. 2016, shown at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So let's get you oriented. So Ship Island is a bisected stretch of sand 10 miles offshore of Gulfport, Mississippi. The island chain from Dolphin Island, Alabama on the east to Cat Island, Mississippi on the west provides the mainland protection from wave attenuation or from waves. And it's a popular tourist destination as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, managed by the National Park Service. And it's an important habitat for birds, sea turtles, and the endangered Gulf sturgeon. It also has a significant cultural resource in Fort Massachusetts. And if you look closely, you can see north of Cat Island is the Gulfport Navigational Channel, which runs from Gulfport to the pass between Cat and West Ship Islands. So there's a lot of resources and industry and economic considerations related to this particular area. Next slide, please. So Ship Island actually used to be a contiguous island. It wasn't broken into east and west. And over the last 100 years, the island is breached and self-healed. But in 1969, it was cut in half by Hurricane Camille and partially submerged again by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Hurricanes and other erosional processes have actually widened that cut since Katrina to about 5,800 meters. And storms are just a huge driver and stressor affecting island geomorphology. Also, island geomorphology affects the east-west longshore sediment transport, which can influence dredging requirements in the Gulfport Navigational Channel. Next slide, please. So in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, Congress directed the Mobile District Army Corps of Engineers to repair the Mississippi Barrier Islands as a first line of defense against future storms. The Ship Island restoration is one element of the $1.4 billion Mississippi Coastal Improvements Program, I believe now called the Coastal Resiliency Program. And it was under that program that USGS was brought in by the Army Corps to help support the development of a long-term monitoring and adaptive management plan. And it was really my motivation for submitting the proposal to the CASC to bring structured decision-making into the planning process. Next slide, please. So with the support from the Army Corps Mobile District and funding support from the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center and USGS, we were able to incorporate a structured decision-making process into the adaptive management program. And in developing an adaptive management program, there's typically a setup phase and an implementation phase as shown in this graphic. And it's common in the setup phase for stakeholders to be really engaged in identifying objectives, but it's actually less common for stakeholders to be engaged throughout the entire setup and iterative implementation phases. Many AM programs actually also fall short on establishing formalized decision structures to integrate learning about the effectiveness of management actions and system dynamics. And in programs that I've worked on, I found that integrating SDM into an adaptive management program really helps with forward thinking on decisions that may need to be made based on the uncertainties associated with restoration and management actions. Next slide, please. So structured decision-making, or SDM, I'll probably flip back and forth in using those terms, is a values-based process for guiding stakeholders and decision makers through a collaborative process of formulating the decision context, establishing objectives, generating a set of creative management alternatives, identifying key uncertainties that might affect the decision, and making trade-offs among objectives. And the SDM framework really, I think, does a great job of breaking down complex decisions into their component parts. And it typically results in decisions that are more defensible, transparent, and robust than decisions that are made without that formal structure. Specifically, we followed in this project an SDM framework that includes an assessment of problems, objectives, alternatives, consequences, and trade-offs. And in the literature, it's called PROACT. And that process, again, gives the structure to working with our stakeholders to get to the endpoint of making a decision. Next slide, please. So typical SDM applications occur at the beginning of project planning, where various restoration and management alternatives are being considered. But barrier islands, being that they're dynamic and there's a lot of uncertainty associated with barrier islands and forcings on barrier islands, combine that with this project, there was a phased nature to the barrier island restoration project in that it's being built over 3 years, really made it an ideal candidate for a novel mid-construction application of SDM. And to date, I don't think I've seen another sort of mid-construction application that's been made, at least in the literature. So structured decision-making is also a great process to arrive at a course of action via consensus, even when multiple potentially conflicting objectives are present. And on this slide, you see the ship island objectives that were identified with the stakeholders in the planning stage. And you'll see that some are potentially conflicting. For example, the type of sand, whether it's fine or coarse, and the island elevation and the slope have different influences on, say, bird and sea turtle habitat as compared to, say, wave attenuation. Also, the project needed to address concerns from the jurisdictional agencies, Fish and Wildlife Service for their responsibilities related to shorebirds and sea turtles, and NOAA as it relates to their responsibilities for sturgeon. And so we needed to account for their needs and values in the SDM process. Next slide. So the focus of this study was to use SDM to develop a transparent framework for informing choices on how to respond to potential storm impacts that may occur during the 4 phases of construction that could ultimately impact project objectives. We also wanted to identify crucial uncertainties in process understanding that limits the optimal management of barrier islands, and if possible, how this process might be able to improve future applications and a part of regional scale long-term adaptive resource management. So how can we think about this beyond the scope of the Ship Island project? So SDM was applied to the 4 phases of barrier island restoration at Ship Island to set up a decision process that could be quickly and effectively implemented during construction to make decisions about whether the restored berm, if it incurs damages, what types of decisions would you make? And so I wanted to go through the phases of the project. Phase 1 was the initial closure of Camille Cut, and that was placing sand 500 feet wide and at a +5 elevation. Phase 2 raised and widened the phase 1 template to 1,000 feet and +7-foot elevation. Phase 3 placed a fine grain sediment cap along the berm crest. That was 1,100 feet and between a 3.5 and 7-foot elevation. And phase 4 added additional sand nourishment on the north side of East Ship Island. Phase 5, which was not included in the decision model, included a dune vegetated planting. Now, the thing to notice on this project is that the total project cost was the budget was $439 million, which included 32% contingency, and the total sand available for the project was 22 million cubic yards. So this is a huge project with huge decisions to ensure that it is actually effective and is able to be designed to address the overall objectives. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the construction of this 3-year project was just completed. And so to help you visualize what our decision model was trying to inform, let me actually show you some of the construction photos for each phase. And that way you can envision how the design template could address the objectives and how certain phases may be susceptible to different storm inundation impacts. Next slide, please. So this is the initial closure during phase 1, that 500-foot and +5 elevation. Again, this is the lowest and most susceptible phase. Next slide, please. Phase 2 was expanding that to 1,000 feet and a +7 elevation. Next slide, please. Phase 3 was at 1,100 foot wide and +3.5 to +7 elevation. Next slide. Phase 4 was the east ship nourishment placement. And then phase 5, next slide, please, the planting project. So again, that gives you sort of a feel of the size and scope associated with the actual design template. Next slide, please. So the problem in our pro-site evaluation in the SDM was what happens if and when a tropical storm or hurricane impacts the island during the 3-year construction. We know that there's only a fixed amount of sand and budget available, and would there be enough to construct as planned and meet the objectives? Do you actually fix it immediately if there's an impact during the phase, or do you wait till a later phase and increase the risks of further damage? And what about cost considerations on mobilizing and demobilizing the dredge? Once a dredge is out there, the cost is between $200,000 and $250,000 a day. And what if it hits during phase 1, when the island's narrower and not as high as in phases 2 through 4? So we had to think through all of these questions using our SDM process. Next slide, please. So the SDM was actually conducted through a collaborative decision analysis with a diverse team of stakeholders representing multidisciplinary expertise in barrier island ecosystems. Our participants represented subject matter experts, decision makers, and stakeholders who preserve, manage, or restore barrier islands across the Gulf of Mexico region. Specifically, we followed that PROACT framework and utilized a series of webinars and workshops to develop our conceptual understanding and to conduct rapid prototyping of decision models. The webinars were really important in that they explained each step of the process to help the participants prepare for the in-person discussions, while the workshops got everyone in the room together to formulate the main project objectives, the potential problems that could arise during construction, and the consequences and trade-offs of different response actions. In those discussions, then the stakeholders were assigned or asked to assign numeric values and weights to each aspect of the decisions, which allowed them to kind of articulate which elements were most important to them and why. And then behind the scenes, the workshop facilitators and our decision modelers put these values into a statistical framework to generate action recommendations that could inform subsequent decision or discussions. Each step was documented so that the participants could refer back to why specific decisions were made. The result of the elicitation process was a quantified expected performance of potential decisions based on the impact to the objectives. Next slide, please. So the first decision framework focused on whether to repair a major breach that occurred after the berm was expanded in phase 2. So it only focused on sort of that, what to do in phase 3. And the decision was a simple yes, no, and no alternatives. And what's shown on the screen is what's called an influence diagram, which is a conceptual modeling tool that graphically represents the causal relationships between objectives, decisions, external factors, uncertainties, and outcomes that was developed by our expert elicitation team. And so it's very similar to a conceptual model where the arrows indicate connectivity between the elements, some of which, such as a major breach, may or may not occur. It was part of our problem statement that we're trying to address. And then each element is really a function of all others that point to it. So a major breach at the end of phase 2 is a function of the occurrence of a major breach during phase 2 and the decision to repair it. And so we addressed the external drivers, which were storm inundation and longshore transport. Those are in brown. Our decision nodes, whether to repair the breach, is in green. The ultimate objectives were tied to the objectives that I mentioned previously: sea turtle nesting, sturgeon habitat, salinity, wave attenuation, and channel shoaling. And those are in red. And then where we needed expert elicitation, those are underlined. So in building out these decision models, they're actually informed by process data models, but where we don't have information, then we use expert elicitation. And so the decision also to repair a major breach in phase 1 we made as automatic, but it's included in the decision model because it influences the budget and sand constraints, which are identified in blue. Next slide, please. And this is what a BayesNet or a decision model actually looks like, and how we take the information that's in and the relationships that are described in the influence diagram and assign probabilities that were determined through our expert elicitation and informed by the data and models. And so I highlighted in the boxes some of the elements from the influence diagram so that you can kind of see how they fit in a built out decision model. And then in the elicitation process, trade-offs were discussed amongst the multiple objectives, and the decision model then seek to sort of find an optimal strategy to best achieve all the fundamental objectives. A utility value that you see up in the top center of the diagram incorporates the predicted outcomes and relative weights from the trade-off discussions for each objective, and then they're used to quantify the overall performance of each alternative. And I'm not going to go into the details of the decision model, but you can see how we evaluated the strategy shown in blue there to the left, which are essentially our management alternatives of whether to offset longshore transport of sand, which might be influenced by a breach, and whether to fix a major breach or not based on inundation and fill height and the effects of that on the objectives. So for example, we found that there was really only a 15% chance of a major breach during phase 3, and at, phase 3 is when the elevations are already at a 7-foot elevation. Next slide, please. And so in working through the decision model, what we found in this first decision framework is that the main results were that sand was more limiting than money, meaning that there was plenty of contingency funds, and working through the costs in the decision model found that really it was sand that we may not have enough on if we have a major breach. And a major breach was defined as greater than 670,000 cubic yards. And that number was derived from data that were received, that were generated by looking at historic breaching of the island. What we also found is that a major breach would negatively impact the wave attenuation objective. Working through this initial decision framework, again, that came out of those expert elicitation, webinars and workshops and the rapid prototyping, the team found that that decision framework was way too simple, since we only considered a major breach in phase 2, and the only decision was whether to repair or not. So next slide. So we embarked on a second decision framework that considered both lowering and or narrowing of the island and minor or major breaching within all 4 phases. The alternatives considered including immediate repairs versus repairing in the next phase. Again, remember the phases I described. But we had the same constraint of sand at 22 million cubic yards. But the budget, one of the decisions that the Army Corps made, that the budget, they wanted to reserve $39 million of the contingency funds that would be considered like cost savings that could then be put towards other restoration projects. So we built that into the decision model. The other thing is we built in the use of coarser versus finer sand, because finer sand costs less, but from an island sustainability standpoint, it's much more easily transported out of the system. And so now our expert elicitation included discussions on how inundation in each phase would influence the overall fill conditions, and not just only breach, but how it would change the width and the height of the island. And as you can see from this diagram, there's a whole lot more complexity in the model. So again, it was designed the same way as the simple framework in terms of the decisions being in green, the constraints in blue, et cetera. Next slide, please. And so because there's much greater uncertainty around how our sand berms in each phase might be lowered as a function of inundation and the height of the fill, we had to ask some additional questions, and we independently asked our experts to quantify conditional probabilities and constrain the volumes of sand that might be lost under different types of damages. And so these were just 2 examples of the questions that we asked independently. And when we ask those questions, it's asked after the current data and models that might have information to inform those questions have been discussed thoroughly amongst the group. Next slide, please. There are also budget considerations on deciding when to repair. For example, for an immediate repair, the total cost is a sand cost plus that remobilization cost of a dredge from its current location. So there isn't there's still an extra cost there, but as compared to repairing in the next phase, that total cost has to capture the cost of probable sand lost during weakening or due to the weakening. So we had to make some decisions based on how much sand do we think would be lost during that weakening. Next slide, please. And so when we look at our results, we found that minor lowering and narrowing favors waiting until the next phase. There's a lower probability of breach and a lower expected cost. And lower expected cost is actually shown by the negative values in this table. So for example, as shown in that lower red box, as long as we didn't go below 5 feet, then we had, it made a decision in phase 2 to delay the repair. And then when you had more major damage, such as lowering to less than 3 foot in the phase 1, which is that upper red box, remembering that the design template at that phase is only +5. If you have major damage, it actually favors an immediate repair due to the likelihood of a major breach. Next slide, please. And we also looked at impacts to the individual objectives based on the level of damage and whether it was repaired or unrepaired. And so we found a major post-construction breach and or just an extensive damage scenario would impact wave attenuation, turtle nesting habitat, and shorebird habitat while having a small impact on other objectives. Next slide, please. So the SDM application to Ship Island allowed the stakeholder and expert team to identify and quantify objectives, identify damage and repair options, and quantify probabilities and estimated sand loss. We identified that it's better to repair major damage immediately rather than risk more damage to a weakened project based on those sand and cost constraints. We found that the SDM can explicitly link that process data and models to the decisions, which is commonly a weakness in adaptive management plans. Next slide, please. So what did we learn, at least as it relates to coastal processes? Well, we actually had robust data and inundation models where our experts had low uncertainty in predicting the probability of breaching. Again, we could go and we looked at historical breaching events and aspects of the breaching. However, our experts did have high uncertainty predicting the relationship of island width to breaching, the amounts of sand lost if the berm is damaged, and the potential for minor breaches to self-heal. The existing modeling that's out there just doesn't capture that well as the relationship between upstream nourishment and berm resiliency. And what this suggests is that research in barrier island dynamics could be more focused, maybe such as the volume of sand loss in breaching, narrowing, and lowering of a berm, and trying to better understand the impact of island width on breach probability. And by doing that, maybe we could better inform management as well as illustrate the potential for direct incorporation of numerical model output or data to replace some of the expert opinion. Next slide, please. So what did we learn as it relates to SDM? Well, I think for dynamic systems like barrier islands, where there's a lot of uncertainty, using expert elicitation, although it simplifies possible outcomes, and in some cases maybe oversimplifies, if we could move away from and have more process data and modeling injection, I think it would improve. The expert elicitation also introduces subjectivity, but the one thing it also does is it identifies where we're most uncertain. So when we have a large range in expert elicited values, that can actually help, if it's tied to an adaptive management plan, target what monitoring and research needs there are. Also, feedback from the stakeholders suggested that they cared about the overall probabilities, but really there was a need that they identified for the science community to find a better way to quantify the effects of storms. Again, there's just, especially related to narrowing and lowering, there's just a lot of uncertainty there. So again, it gave us sort of a blueprint of where we might support some additional data and model development. Next slide, please. So what did we do with these results when we completed our research in 2015. But one of the things that we did is we developed a simple decision tree, which is shown there on the right, with recommended actions for each phase of construction. So the one that I pulled up here is the actions for phase 4 that the Army Corps would take, depending upon the site damages. So if there was impacts during construction, it gave them a very easy plan of and decision tree of what they would do. So again, if sand was still available within the 22 million cubic yard limit for the project, and there was a major breach, then the decision would be to actually repair damages in that phase. And so you can work through each of those particular decision scenarios. The other thing is that the advanced planning of having the decisions in advance actually eliminates possible wasted time and money in having to analyze and make a decision on the spot during crisis. And so we actually built the SDM results into the Mississippi Coastal Improvement Program Monitoring and Adaptive Management Plan, as well as these recommended actions. So it was embedded in and to be followed during the construction of the project. Next slide, please. So what happened during construction? Well, construction again was from December 2017 to December 2020. So again, it spanned 3 hurricane seasons. And Ship Island was actually influenced by Tropical Storm Gordon in 2018, Tropical Storm Olga in 2019, and Tropical Storm Cristobal and Hurricane Sally and Zeta in 2020, among other smaller storms. So despite a barrage of wind and waves, the newly placed sand and vegetation remained intact. And the project didn't experience any mid-construction disasters, which is good news. There was never any impacts that required any of our recommended actions to kick in, meaning a big financial investment to fix impacts or a bunch of extra sand to repair. But had the Army Corps been in that situation, they knew what the answer was in advance. Next slide, please. So I guess some takeaways on SDM and adaptive management planning would be, collaborative decision-making requires having decision makers, managers, subject matter experts, and SDM expertise, whether it's a coordinator, a coach, facilitator in the room. These discussions, collaborative discussions take time. Next, you need to invest in clearly identifying your fundamental and means objectives. A lot of times in AM programs, you have these very broad objectives, but they leave some subjectivity in terms of what they're actually trying to achieve with those objectives. We put the stakeholder values on the table. Again, a lot of times when objectives are reviewed by stakeholders in a public forum, it really doesn't allow discussion amongst the values of the different stakeholders, and that they're all put on the table in this process. Elicitation of stakeholder values takes a lot of time and effort, so you need to be really clear on what you're trying to ask and what you need from them. Keep the guts of the Bayesian network behind the scenes. When we tried to explain the details of the statistics behind it with our stakeholders, it just made things more difficult for us. We brought it forward once we made it through all the sausage making. The process clearly identifies high uncertainties in predictions, which can be used then to target in your man plan or your science program. And then explicit decision-making processes need to be included in the man plan. So once you've worked through this, lock it in, essentially. Next slide, please. I mentioned that one focus of the Ship Island project was to help identify how the SDM and adaptive management process might be improved in future applications, and whether we can think about barrier islands as part of a regional scale, long-term adaptive resource management. Well, in 2015, we were funded to start work at Dolphin Island, Alabama, which again, I showed was the island that is located east of Gulf Islands in Mississippi. This is a 14-mile inhabited barrier island, and it's really the only barrier island that provides protection to the state of Alabama's coastal resources. Next slide, please. And so the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation funded the state of Alabama, the Army Corps Mobile District, and USGS to investigate viable options for restoration of Dolphin Island that can increase island sustainability and restore vital habitats for species that were affected by the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And I'm not going to go through this project, which was completed in 2020, but the story map that's shown here, which was developed for stakeholders on Dolphin Island, really describes the details of the project and provides links to published data and reports. I wanted to show the project because it builds off the work at Ship Island. Next slide, please. The SDM process was actually used to evaluate 23 different restoration and land acquisition measures that could best address a suite of physical, ecological, cost, and social objectives. Next slide, please. And one of the enhancements in this project, from what we learned at Ship Island, is to design the assessment to include more process-based data and models that could be used in place of expert elicitation values. The integrated modeling approach taken at Dolphin Island allowed us to model the effects of storms and sea level rise on morphologic evolution. So we actually had a dune growth and recovery, as well as a shore profile response model. And we are able to link the morphology to the habitat model, two habitat suitability models, a water quality model, and a structural response model. And then the modeling outputs allowed us to reduce the reliance on expert elicitation in the SDM and better target monitoring in the adaptive management planning. Next slide, please. Another enhancement in this project was that the decision model developed was directly tied to the cost estimation of the projects, which allowed all of the restoration measures to be ranked by their utility scores. And so this allowed for a feasibility level assessment to be provided to the state of Alabama. And they use that information to make immediate decisions on what restoration projects to fund and construct. And so since completion of this study, the state of Alabama has funded a number of the recommended or higher benefit projects that were identified through our process. Next slide, please. What we also did on this project is have a tighter coupling between the SDM and the conceptual model development for the monitoring and adaptive management plan to inform the selection of performance measures. And the probability distributions associated with each model in the SDM can now be updated by the monitoring of the physical performance of the implemented restoration measures and the associated outcomes of the measured state variables, so that we can see how well, reflect back on what we had in our probabilities. Next slide, please. And so in addition to the work in Alabama, Louisiana is building out a system-level barrier island management system under the leadership of Supi Dalliander from the Water Institute and Darren Lee from Louisiana Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. And they both participated on the original Ship Island project. I would say the three efforts described today are getting us closer to regional scale adaptive resource management for barrier islands in the north central Gulf of Mexico. Next slide, please. And so to wrap up, I think SDM provides an open and transparent process that really helps information exchange among the scientific, engineering, and management communities to facilitate decision making. And so the last slide, please, is just I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and thanks very much.
Well, that was a great presentation. Thanks, Greg. So I'll open it up. It looks like we've already have a question in the chat. Greg, do you want to, can you see the chat from where you're sitting? Do you, or you want me to read out the questions?
I am just now looking at them, so
Okay.
yeah, I'm pulling it up.
I would ask if you could read it out, just so it goes into the audio track, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that is fine. This came from Courtney Shoup, and it says, really interesting case study. Did the Ship Island MAM team also discuss the pros and cons of stockpiling extra sand on the island during construction versus reserving a large sum in case renourishment is needed in post-construction years? I don't believe that was discussed. Again, because of the susceptibility of any sand that you put on the islands due to storms, I think the potential, and this is, like I said, it wasn't discussed, but I think the potential loss of those sand resources before you need it, like I said, if we got to those critical stages of losing elevation or narrowing. So I don't think that was discussed. But one of the things that was built into the monitoring and adaptive management plan was contingency funds for post storm evaluations. So essentially, we could identify, we could go out and identify, what our elevations are, take some measurements and see where that fits into our decision criteria and whether or not there would be a need for trying to identify the resources to be able to go and make some, to address that particular need. It says, and if so, can you please share insights on discussion and decision-making, such as ecological elevation requirements versus remobilization costs? So again, we had a design sort of what are good and bad conditions related to each of our resources. So for sea turtles, for example, we knew that they needed to have nesting conditions that were at least 3 foot in elevation. So if we got below 3 foot in elevation, that would impact the sea nesting requirements. And so we did that relative to what type of conditions we hope to maintain for our salinity conditions. We looked at how much wave attenuation through our wave models we might get at different elevations. And so we used that and built that into the SDM process. Remobilization costs were just one cost that was captured. So we had to incorporate the sand, the remobilization, all of those costs sort of together to make sure that we were staying within the overall budget cost constraints on the project. Hope that answers it. The next one says, how and how frequently will Ship Island stakeholder input be collected and incorporated in adaptive management in out years? What types of stakeholders are included in addition to the scientists and any lessons learned? Well, one of the things that I really like about the leadership that the Army Corps Mobile District has done on this project from the very beginning is they have monthly stakeholder calls that I can't remember the numbers of people on it, but when I've been on those calls, at times there's 30, 40 plus people on the calls, and they've done it throughout the entire planning stages all the way through and continuing till today. And the idea is to share information, not only related to the work that we did and the construction progress, But as we, are more into the adaptive management phase, being able to provide them updates on what we're learning, so that it's not just we generated a baseline report or a post-construction report and they just read it. So we try to have that engagement. And I again, the Army Corps has done a great job of having those calls. And again, those calls can be short or long, depending upon what new information needs to be conveyed to them. Let me see. Next one was from Dave Hewitt. Can you post a link to the story map for the Dolphin Island project? And Elise just did that. Brian's asking, what's your experience in stakeholder group trust in Bayesian model outputs, particularly if they suggest a strategy contrary to the priority of a particular stakeholder? Well, great question. So, trust has to be built throughout the whole, every phase of a project, even before you get to, the structured decision-making related process. We try to get representation of the different stakeholder groups to participate in that Bayesian model development. Again, when it's communicated, it's primarily communicated through the individual probabilities and discussing it through the influence diagram, so they don't have to get overwhelmed by the content that's in the actual Bayesian model itself. But just because we have some representation, there may be another stakeholder that of a particular resource group that didn't agree. So again, we're trying, if everything is open and transparent, those that don't agree can at least follow through how the decisions were actually made and what were the trade-offs between them. So that may not still make them happy, but at least it will give them that clear understanding that there was a process in place by which that decision was made. And then Carrie shared at the end that there was a nice post on the Ship Island project. This was a project spotlight that recently came out in June. So I think that concludes the chat questions.
Yeah. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand in that reactions bar down there. And while other folks are maybe formulating questions, I have a question. Greg, you mentioned that, and I think that this is, at the end, you circle back around to maybe this happening in some of the coastal areas, some of these Louisiana, Alabama projects, but how common is it, or is it becoming more common, I should say, to use SDM, to incorporate SDM through the whole adaptive management process? I know you'd mentioned that was kind of unusual, certainly recommended, but I didn't know if there's more of that happening now based on your experience.
I would say in the prior to this project, there wasn't a lot of application of structured decision making. The Ship Island project, there wasn't a lot of applications of structured decision making for restoration efforts in the Gulf. Structured decision making has a pretty long history. It's used a lot more in resource management decisions on waterfowl and other both at the national scale and regional and local scale. But a lot of times it's just exposing the tool and approach to a larger audience. And then once the process is exposed, when you have projects that have a lot of potentially conflicting objectives and a lot of different values of what stakeholders want to see, it's being more recognized as an approach that can help get through those difficult conversations and these complex problems. So just seeing, barrier islands, there's a smaller group of folks who have been working on barrier islands in the Gulf for the past couple of decades, and they all pretty much know each other. And it was great to see that, and why we brought Louisiana folks into a Mississippi project is to show them how we're applying it here, and with the hope that if it worked out well, they would take it with them, and if it didn't work out well, they could figure out how to improve it if they saw value in using it. And I guess seeing it continue to be utilized in Dolphin and now in Louisiana kind of shows that, yeah, there's value to it. And just so you know, SDM is not an approach that needs to be done on every project. Like I said, it's time consuming, both on those that are utilizing it and putting it together, as well as those who participate in the process. And so when you have these bigger types of projects or these big issues and questions and a lot of complexity, I think it works great.
That's great. Thanks. Are there any other questions from folks in the audience? If not, I'd like to pose one more. And then I think we'll be at time and we'll have to close out. But you had mentioned that there were some high uncertainty sort of topics that experts had us going through the process. And I was curious to know if there's been additional science identified and, for either active implementation or future implementation that might address some of those issues that were, emerged during part of this.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned with Dolphin Island, we incorporated. Dolphin Island was really nice in that there was sufficient funding through NIFWIF to do pretty intensive data acquisition to build out these integrated modeling frameworks, which included the Army Corps in Mobile and their Engineering Research Development Center and USGS, and there was a lot of ability to look at what we did and see what data and model improvements could be made. I think in all of the programs, and especially now in Louisiana, they're really they've been able to identify the research needs that will allow them to tie their barrier island restoration to the larger regional sediment management approach that they're taking to restoration in Louisiana. So I think in all cases, USGS, we learned a lot and are trying to incorporate that in our research programs and what we are either funding through USGS or attempting to get funded under other programs. So I think we're all kind of doing that.
Yeah, great, a great outcome. So I would say thanks again, and let everyone give our thanks and applause to Greg while Ashlyn transitions to our last slide. And but yeah, that was a great presentation, and appreciate the discussion as well. So Ashlyn, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie, and thanks, Greg, for that great presentation, and for everyone that posted some questions in the chat. I just want to wrap up today, since we're here at the end of the hour, by letting everyone know about our next science presentation that we have planned. We're excited that we're jointly hosting that with our partners at the South Atlantic Conservation Blueprint. So this special science seminar is going to be on September 26th at 10 a.m. Eastern, given by Dr. Michelle Moorman of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's called Will the Marsh Stay or Will It Go? Coastal Wetland Transformations in the South Atlantic Basin. So we hope you'll register and plan to join us for that presentation and discussion. And finally, by registering for today's webinar, you're also going to be subscribed to our monthly newsletter, where you'll be able to learn about these upcoming seminars and other events. And of course, you're welcome to unsubscribe from that at any time. And that is where you can get more information about the upcoming seminar for next month. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And again, to Greg for your time and your presentation and expertise. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.